Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to talk about my favorite books that I read in 2016. So yesterday I posted a video all about all of my least favorite books that I read in 2016, if you would like to go and watch that. But today we are starting the new year, and I thought it would be fun to start the year off by talking about all of the wonderful books that I discovered in 2016. There were so many good ones. In fact, there were actually so many that I cannot do a top 10. I had to do a top 11. It just wasn't gonna work otherwise. The books that I have on this list are all books that I rated either a 4.5 or a 5-star throughout the year, so let's just get started and I can talk about all of my favorite stuff that I read last year. So the very first book on my list, coming in at number 11, is In Real Life by Cory Doctorow and Jen Wang. This is, of course, actually a graphic novel, but I read a couple of really wonderful graphic novels and comics this year, so a couple of them were bound to make the list. In Real Life is about a girl named Anda, and she is obsessed with this MMORPG called Course Gold. And then while she's in the game, she meets a Chinese boy who is doing illegal things within the game because he's poor, and she starts to learn that there's a lot more going on than she thought. This book is fantastic. It's about recognizing privilege and understanding different backgrounds, but it is also a celebration of gaming in a way a few of the other books I read this year just weren't. I read this almost immediately after I read Ready Player One and really didn't enjoy its depiction of girl gamers, and this just made everything feel good and wonderful again. The art style is simple and colorful and just so much fun, and overall this graphic novel just wound up meaning so much to me and I completely adored it. Coming in at number 10 on my favorites list is Saga, volumes 2 and 3 specifically, and this is a series by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. This is a comic series about a conflict that is going on between a planet, Landfall, and its moon, Wreath. The people who inhabit both of these places are locked in a conflict, but the main characters of the story is a person from Landfall and a person from Wreath, and they've fallen in love and had a forbidden child. They're also being hunted across the galaxy. This series is so full of adventure and fun. I've always loved space stories, and so it's great because of that, but also all of the creatures consistently impress me. Not only that, but I found myself getting invested in every single storyline that has been introduced so far, which with comic series, sometimes I cannot care about certain storylines, and that has not happened with this series. It has continued to impress me. I keep waiting for a future volume to let me down, but I think possibly that volume 3 was my favorite so far, so these definitely deserve a spot on my favorites list. Coming in at number 9, we've got Invasion of the Tearling by Erika Johansen. Invasion of the Tearling is actually the second book in a trilogy. The first book is Queen of the Tearling, and it is such a good trilogy. I can't talk too much about the plot of this one since it's a sequel, obviously, but the first book is about this girl named Kelsey who's been raised away from the kingdom with the expectation that when she turns 19, she will return to the kingdom and take her rightful place on the throne as the Tearling's queen. Also, this series is very strange because it is a fantasy, but it actually takes place in the future in sort of a regressed society. It is so incredibly unique, and the development of Kelsey as a character has been amazing to watch. She's one of those characters that even within 2 books she's changed so much, but it's all completely believable. The final book came out in November, The Fate of the Tearling, and I have not read it yet, but I will be reading it hopefully in February, and I cannot wait to see how the series concludes because this was a sequel that actually topped the first book, and that is rare. Coming in at number 8, we've got Everything Leads to You by LaCour. This is a YA contemporary with a lesbian lead character. It is a mystery. The lead character, Emmy, discovers that a Clint Eastwood-esque actor who defined Hollywood but is now dead might have a daughter, and so she goes on a search for that daughter. Of course, also romance ensues. The romance in this book is absolutely wonderful. I loved it. This is, I think, my favorite queer YA contemporary because it just was queer so effortlessly and the romance was done so well while it also just being a mystery. It wasn't a coming out story, and it was really well done. This book also had a really interesting commentary on privilege that I appreciated, and overall, clearly I was just very, very passionate about it, and I can't believe it took me as long to read it as it did because I knew I would love it this much. At number 7 on my list, I've got The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I actually read this twice in 2016. 2 times in 1 year. The first time because I really wanted to, and the second time because I loved it so much the first time I decided to write my thesis about it, which really I should be doing right now, but I don't want to. This is a book that takes place in the early 1900s. It's about a black woman named Celie coming of age, getting married. She goes through a lot of periods of abuse and how she has grown from all of this, how she develops as a person. Additionally, Celie is a lesbian, so it's about her relationship with another woman in the story, and Celie is just a beautiful character. The first time I read this, I loved her. The second time cemented her as one of my favorite female characters of all time. The relationship between Celie and Shug is really well done, but overall, it's just Celie's journey that is so emotional and just wonderful to read. Of course, it's difficult to read at times, but the way that she comes from these experiences and becomes the person that she becomes is beautifully done, and I absolutely adore this book. And the next book that I want to talk about is The Summer That Melted Everything by Tiffany McDaniel. This is actually, like a few of these are, a book that I got for review and then wound up loving so much. It is about this small town in Ohio in the 1980s, and it is the hottest summer in recorded Ohio history. There is a man in this town named Autopsy Bliss, and one day he challenges the devil to come into town, and the next day a young black boy appears claiming that he is the devil. This book has some of the most well done writing that I've read. You could feel the heat coming off that book. It was so well described, and the characters were so interestingly done and put together. You may not have guessed by the cover or even maybe by my description that I just gave you, but it is one of the darker books that I've ever read. It deals with incredibly difficult subjects, but it does them very well. It tackles each topic in a way that is smart and in a way that works really well. And overall, any book that just gets into my bones as much as this book did has definitely earned a spot on my favorites of the year list. I cannot wait to reread it, and Tiffany McDaniel as a debut author impressed me so much, and I cannot wait to read what she writes next. If we're going to talk about another book that has incredible writing, I want to mention Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This is actually more of a novella than anything else. It's quite short, but it takes place in this world where these children have found a doorway to another world. In sort of a Narnia type deal. They found the place where they truly belong, and then they have been returned back to Earth. Unfortunately, when they return, they are no longer happy. They no longer feel like they fit in, and so they are sent to this house where a bunch of other children have also gone to the worlds they belong and have come back not the same. The main character is asexual. There is a trans side character as well as a Japanese side character, and the cast is just one of the many things that this book does so right. It also talks a lot about gender expectation with a couple of these side characters. The writing of this book is so lush, and it is so descriptive, and often comes across as very lyrical. It kind of has this vibe of poetry to it, despite the fact that it's not poetry. Clearly I was passionate about this book. That's the main thing to take away. It completely blew me away, and I was so glad that I got the chance to read it this year. Coming in at number 4, we've got Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. This is about a girl named Princess Denna who has been betrothed to the prince of a foreign kingdom, but when she gets there, she starts to fall in love with his horse-riding sister instead. Beyond that, Denna also has control of fire magic, which is bad because this kingdom she's moved into is they don't allow magic, so she has to hide that. But what I must emphasize every time I review this book is that there is no homophobia in this book. Queer relationships are fine. The only problem Denna has in falling in love with Mare is that Mare is not her betrothed. This was the book that I have been looking for so many years of my life and for so many reasons, but mainly it is a book with 2 princesses falling in love. It had court intrigue, it had a ton of adventure, background queer characters, and Denna and Mare's romance was written so well. The build-up was wonderful. Every time they would hold hands, I just would lose it a little bit. It seems like Audrey isn't going to write any more of this series, and that makes me really sad, but it also makes me so excited to see what she's going to do next, because this book blew me off my feet. Alright, we're coming into the top 3. At number 3, we've got Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee. This book takes place a few years in the future, and it takes place in a time where a lot of people have developed superpowers. It follows our main character, Jessica Tran, and her two parents are actually the main superheroes of the town that she lives in, but it seems like Jessica isn't developing powers of her own, so she goes and gets an internship, only to discover that this internship is working for the town's supervillains. Plus, the other person who's working at this internship is her crush, Abby. I love superhero stories, but not the ones that are currently coming out like in the theater anymore. I feel like they've all become too repetitive. I love superhero stories that make superheroes new and interesting, and this book 100% did that. Jessica is bisexual and biracial. Her parents are Vietnamese and Chinese respectively. Beyond that, she also has a trans best friend who was introduced in the best way I have ever seen a trans character introduced into a book. But the reason we know that Bells is trans is because of a small conversation in which Jessica asks if he's okay because he's had his binder on for a few hours. What? That's just so well done, and why I'm so thrilled that the next book in this series, Not Your Villain, is actually going to be about Bells. Also, the romance between Jess and Abby is incredible. It's so awkward. It's so deeply awkward, but I love it. Overall, it was fun, it was funny, it was new and fresh and fabulous. I loved every side character. I feel that they were written with as much care and with as much detail as Jess was, and I completely adored this book and cannot wait for the sequel. If you want to get this book, this was published by Interlude Press, so I will leave the link to their store down in the description below, because you should buy it. Coming in at number 2 on my list, I've got A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, inspired by a story by Siobhan Dowd with art by Jim Kay. Whew, I did it. This book has a vague description that I stick to 100%. It is about a young boy named Connor who is 13, and one night a monster shows up, and the monster is not the one he expects, and the monster only wants him to tell the truth. Sorry, that's about as detailed as I'm going to get. This book made me cry for half its length. It is about 200 pages long, and I cried for about 100 pages of that. It is about processing grief and anger, especially at a very young age when those huge emotions can be so much to try to process. Also, the bits of art in here are completely beautiful, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Jim Kay actually does the illustrations for the illustrated editions of Harry Potter that are currently coming out, so obviously they're beautiful illustrations. This was just deeply emotional and a book that I want to give to a lot of people. I just feel like it's something that so many different people can get something out of, and any book that makes me cry for 100 pages absolutely earns a spot as one of my favorite books of all time, because I get emotional about books, but getting that emotional about books is rare for me. So this was definitely a book that I will want to reread again and again in the future, and I absolutely want to go see the movie as soon as it comes out, which is very, very soon. And we've reached the end. My number 1 book of 2016 is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I have tried to tame my passion for this book in the months since I've read it, and it's just not happening. I love it just as much as I did the second I finished it. It has been a really long time since I've opened a fantasy book and just torn through it because I was so invested and happy to be reading a story like this one. A Darker Shade of Magic takes place in a world in which there are actually parallel worlds, and they are connected through a specific parallel city. There are 4 different versions of London: Grey London, Red London, White London, and Black London, which no one speaks of anymore. Each London has a different level of magic, and there is one guy, Kel. He is one of the few remaining magicians in the world who has the ability to travel between these different Londons. There's also a character named Delilah Bard. She is a pickpocket, and I love her with all of my heart. The story was just so magical, and I love V.E. Schwab's writing. She's become one of my favorite authors this year, easily. So I just felt so much of it was well done. It was adventurous, it was new. There was a bisexual side character that I've heard gets a lot more story going forward, which is thrilling. And Lila actually has one of my favorite lines in this book. It says, "I'd rather die on an adventure than live standing still," which I think sums up the kind of story this is. It is beautifully written, but it is adventurous and fun, and I've heard there are going to be pirates in the next one, which I own. That's happening soon. This was one of the very very few books that I awarded 5 stars to this year, and I stand by it. I had more fun reading this book than I've had in a long time reading a fantasy book, so it definitely deserves to be a favorite book, and I'm hoping that I'm just as passionate about the next 2 in the series. Okay guys, there you go. Those are all of my favorite books that I read in 2016. I hope that you enjoyed my list. I had a hard time making it, but I always love making these favorites lists at the end of the year. They're my favorite to do. If you had some favorite books that you read this year, please leave them in the comments below. I want to hear about them. If you loved any of these books, again, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a wonderful 2017, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!